Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Chicago Lawyer Magazine's Inside Out, where we look at various aspects of the law from the perspective of our unique husband and wife team. The inside view comes from David Susler. He's an inside counsel for National Material LP. The outside view from Tina Martini, a partner at DLA Piper. I'm Andy Shaw, President and CEO of the Better Government Association and the proud father of a very good lawyer, which is why I enjoy doing these segments. And speaking of different generations, fathers, daughters, and things like that, let's look today at the multi-generational aspect of the practice of law. And let me ask you first, Tina, how does that impact a law firm or the practice of law, having all these generations involved in different aspects?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think it's become much more critical now. I mean, I've been practicing for 20 years, and there are folks who are still, I would say, a generation ahead of me that are still practicing. There's the folks in my generation, and I would say they're actually, in some ways, 2 generations behind me. And the end result is that every generation's a little bit different. Folks have different sorts of ways of processing information, looking at the world. Sometimes it's colored by personal and professional experiences that individuals have. Sometimes it's colored by world events. I would say that, for example, the downturn in the economy, I've seen 3 recessions now over my career. And depending on when you are in school and graduate and what kind of workforce you enter into, all these sorts of things tend to ebb and flow and transition from generation to generation. People have different work styles, people have different ways.
Well, how about the thing that I find most relevant as an older professional, and that's the digital thing. The fact that I spent most of my adult life without internet, without social media. You're sort of intermediary there, right? Because you certainly do a lot more of it than I do. It's much harder for me to get into that world, and yet the young lawyers at your firm, and even you two, probably do that with much more facility. Does that play out in the law firm at all?
Well, it does. I mean, I think that part of it is a personal, sort of on an individual level, and some of it's a bigger picture sort of a thing. I mean, obviously my firm, it's global. Information travels a lot faster when you communicate it through more of a mass media type of fashion like the internet and so forth. And it's important in the digital age to be cognizant, particularly depending on what service industry you're in the law. It's really important to have an internet presence. We tweet now as a firm certain articles or certain newsworthy developments that we want people to be aware of. It's important to be cognizant of the way in which people get information and process information. And so it is important to stay with it. So like when I first started practicing, the fax was the thing to do, as well as overnight delivery.
With me, it was Pony Express.
And now it's email. Hardly anybody uses, there is no telecopy, there is no fax anymore, really. It's very important that people sort of make that transition, but that also you're mindful and respectful of people who may not necessarily have the facility that you do with certain types of things.
Same perspective that you're inside, but these same multi-generational issues prevail, and you see people who are very uncomfortable with internet and digital, and people who basically live and die by it every minute.
Yeah, no, it's true. And Tina likes medicine. She's been practicing almost 20 years, so I've been practicing almost 27 now. I'm technically in a different generation. I'm still a baby boomer. I spent I think I practiced 10 years before I had a PC. So I think there's no doubt the advent of modern technology has had a huge impact on the workplace. And with the different generations, you do get different work styles. And it can be fairly confronting at first, but I think it's a way also, if the lawyers are willing to talk to each other and listen to each other and explore these new work styles, it's also a way to bridge the generations. I couldn't do what I do, the nature of my practice today, without technology, without email, without the internet, which didn't exist for the first almost third of my career.
But how are these multi-generational issues evolving, would you say? People, just some of the examples I could think of, people either working longer or less long, starting sooner, moving to even more digital and less paper and print, I mean, those sorts of things. I don't know if the workplace rules, regulations, and statutes change. It seems like those have been fairly stable. But what do you think the evolutionary aspect of multi-generational presence is now?
Well, you know, it's had one of the aspects that I've seen in the last several years is kind of the rise of mentoring within the workplace. You know, we've always had older lawyers teaching younger lawyers how to practice, but there's been an increasing focus on mentoring, and it's more intentional and purposeful, which is a tremendous thing. I think that will continue to grow and evolve, and I find a lot of the younger lawyers coming into the profession are much more intentional about seeking advice and counsel from more experienced practitioners, which I think is a terrific thing. And that also helps to bridge the generations and help older lawyers change their work habits, for example.
Tina, what do you see evolving at this point in the multi-generational sphere?
Well, what I'm seeing is some of the younger generation is starting to progress more into more, I guess, areas of responsibility. They're getting more senior. I definitely think that it's not even just a generational issue anymore. It's almost like a business type issue, that some of what we're seeing with the differences among the generations, I mean, a lot of it is technology driven, but I think it's something that, whether it's the legal profession or any other profession, it's something that has to evolve over time, because there's money that's at stake. Actually, if you don't evolve technologically, for example, you're not just leaving money on the table, you're actually losing money. So I guess what I'm seeing is more working from home or working remotely. You're seeing even more of a 24/7 type of mentality, especially even, you know, it used to be when you would travel on business, you're pretty much taken out of the day-to-day that's at the office. But given technology being what it is and just what the expectations are of the newer generations and the younger generations coming up, is this multitasking and this sort of not just sharing of information through social media and, you know, personal as well as professional, and this whole sort of globalization of the sharing of information, but it's also just even more of a frenzy with respect to getting things done, even when you're in the process of flying, you know, somewhere halfway across the world. The expectation is that you're still going to get it done, regardless of whether you're local or not.
Right, and I think some of the impact and challenges, you know, when I started practicing, lawyers were really tethered to the office in terms of their ability to crank out the physical work product and do legal research. Now you can do it from anywhere. The tether is gone. A challenge is, as the younger generation is coming into the workplace, the generation that's grown up with social media and smartphones, their primary communication style is electronic, not face-to-face. And I think effective lawyering requires face-to-face.
Well, and that's interesting, because I think I agree with you that folks of our generation would definitely ascribe to that. But the question, I think, that's hanging out there is whether that will be, in fact, the case as the younger generations end up becoming the folks who are responsible for sort of leading law departments or leading law firms. Is it going to always be that way? I think one of the things that we've seen is sort of, in some ways, depending on the circumstances, being sacrificed is the socialization aspect of workplaces. I mean, when I was a younger attorney, there was a lot more of a social aspect to the workplace, because people, when they had to work, they had to be here to do it. So there was a lot more interfacing. Now, because people are able to work remotely, there's more of a tendency, and because there's oftentimes cost associated with having people working full-time.
Right.
You've got a number of companies now that want to have this sort of hotel type of arrangement because it saves them money from a real estate standpoint. I think what you end up losing is the whole social aspect sometimes, or at least an element of it that used to exist.
So David, what advice would you offer a colleague who's sort of wondering how you manage this new world of multi-generational relationships? I just think from my own standpoint that with my own kids, the biggest single difference is I, as an older guy, have to be much more careful about being politically correct. You know, well-educated young people tend to be much more sensitive to the kinds of comments that folks like me made cavalierly 30 years ago before people started worrying about what would be offensive. You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure that plays out in your world.
Well, I think that it's kind of a try it, you may like it sort of thing. The two different approaches may start out diametrically opposed, but you need to listen and hear each other and try it out and see what works best. Face-to-face, I don't think face-to-face is ever going to go away, but technology can allow it to occur in a different way, such as a telepresence. You have to keep in mind, though, especially if you're working around the globe, there's different cultures, different societies. Face-to-face is still incredibly important in many other cultures, whereas it may be more acceptable to be electronically related in the US. So the challenge is just to not automatically say, my way is right, your way is wrong, take it or leave it. You have to find a way to meet in the middle and merge. So I think that's ultimately what's going to happen.
And Tina, what would your advice be to a colleague wondering how to manage this? I was thinking you can't automatically punish a young associate who uses like and you know all the time, even though they talk that way. We haven't done that once in this entire segment. We're a little bit older, and I'm just saying there's different kind of stylistic things.
Well, I would say so is the advice to somebody who is older, working with the younger generation?
Maybe just any colleague who's wondering because perhaps they've had rocky relationships with either young associates or old partners.
I mean, I would say that there just needs to be a realization that there are differences and that different people have different styles. And if I were a young attorney, and I just remember having been a young attorney, wanting to be better, both from a verbal standpoint as well as a written standpoint. There's a wealth of knowledge in any workplace, here, anywhere else, and to really be mindful of trying to take the opportunity and really, I guess, seize the opportunity as much as possible to learn from people who've been doing this for a while. And you may not necessarily agree with somebody's professional decisions all the time, and you may not necessarily agree with somebody from a political or a social standpoint, but there's a wealth of knowledge to be learned, and I would say the same is true for someone who's a more senior attorney who's working with a more junior attorney, that there's a point of view and there's an attitude and there's just knowledge that I think regardless of whether you're younger or older, there's always something to be learned from other people, and to keep an open mind about it, because you know, it was a little bit of a shock when I first started practicing, just a culture shock and just the whole idea of starting to work full time and in a very high-paced environment. And you got to realize that it takes time to adjust, and that it's always something that's moving along, that it's not a static environment, it's a dynamic environment. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Let me just to add on to that and emphasize.
You get the last word.
Okay. So the mentoring that I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I like mentoring, if it's done right, it's a two-way street. The mentor can learn as much, if not more, from the mentee to bring to bear in everyday life, what Tina just said. Another thing is, you know, when I have trained younger lawyers over the years, one of the things I've often said to them is, look, you're just starting out. I'm going to teach you to do it how I do it, and I want you to do it the way I'm telling you to do it now so you can learn. Granted, this is my style. You will develop your own style over time, but you need to gain some experience first. So do it how I tell you to start, knowing this isn't where it's going to end.
A taskmaster, at least at the beginning. Mr. Inside, David Susler. Ms. Outside, Tina Martini. This has been an examination of multi-generational aspects of the practice of law, another segment of Chicago Lawyer Magazine's Inside Out. I'm your host, Andy Shaw. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.